Deep in the heart of the rainforest, a man stumbled upon a dying gorilla. Its breath was shallow, its eyes clouded with pain. What happened next would not only save a life, but leave everyone who heard the story absolutely stunned. Before I show you what this incredible gorilla did next, can I ask you something small? If you believe every life, human or animal, deserves a second chance, and that stories like this need to be heard, please tap that subscribe button. Most people scroll past stories like this, but your one click could help this message reach someone who truly needs to see it. The man's name was Lucas Hart, 34 years old, a biologist from Oregon with a quiet mind and a deep love for the wild. Lucas wasn't the type you'd notice in a crowd. He didn't speak unless he had something to say, didn't rush unless it was truly urgent. His life was about observation, patience, and understanding nature, not controlling it. He had arrived in the Congo Basin with a simple mission: document rare orchids for a university research program. That's it. No wild adventure, no danger, no drama, just plants. His job was to find them, study them, photograph them, and take notes. He wasn't here to rescue animals or get involved in anything beyond his assignment. But nature has a way of pulling people into stories they never expected. On the morning that everything changed, Lucas had woken up early. The camp was quiet, birds were calling in the distance, and fog hung low among the trees. He packed a light kit, just water, a satellite phone, a GPS, and his camera. He let the others sleep. He wasn't going far, just a short hike to a ridge he had scouted the day before. He didn't tell anyone he'd be gone for long. That decision, so small at the time, would come to haunt him later. By mid-morning, Lucas had already found several orchid species growing on fallen logs and shaded rocks. He was crouched down, snapping close-ups of a rare purple bloom, when he heard a sound. It wasn't loud, just a faint rustling, like something dragging along the forest floor. He paused, looked up. Nothing. The rainforest is full of movement. A squirrel, a bird, a monkey leaping from branch to branch. But this sound wasn't quick. It was slow, heavy, and close. He stood up slowly, camera still in hand, and scanned the trees. To his left, just beyond a wall of ferns, something massive shifted in the undergrowth. For a second, he saw nothing but darkness between the trees. Then it moved again. Lucas took a few hesitant steps forward, pushing aside vines and branches, and then he saw it. At first, it looked like a collapsed tree trunk, thick, unmoving, coated in dirt and shadows. But as he stepped closer, the shape began to take form. It was a gorilla, a silverback, enormous, easily over 400 pounds, lying on its side, half curled against the base of a tree. Lucas froze. His breath caught in his throat. He'd seen gorillas before from a distance, majestic, powerful creatures with deep eyes and a presence that commanded silence. But this one was different. It wasn't moving. Its chest rose and fell so faintly that he thought, at first, it was already dead. The body was caked in mud and leaves. Its arms lay limp. Its massive head rested awkwardly on a root. One leg was stretched out unnaturally, and Lucas noticed a swarm of flies around the upper thigh. That's when he saw the wound, a deep, angry gash, oozing and raw, the skin around it swollen, the fur matted with dried blood. The gorilla wasn't dead. Not yet. Its eyes, barely open, were foggy, glazed over with pain and exhaustion. It blinked once, slowly, then again, and in that moment, just for a split second, those eyes locked with his. Lucas stepped back instinctively, his heart pounding. He wasn't trained for this. He wasn't a vet, wasn't part of a wildlife rescue team. He was here for plants, for God's sake. But something about that look held him in place. It wasn't threatening. It wasn't even scared. It was tired, so tired. And maybe it was asking for help. He stood there for a long moment, uncertain. Walk away. Run. Go get help. The logical part of his brain screamed for him to retreat, to mark the location and head back to camp. Tell someone. Let the professionals handle it. But his feet didn't move, because the gorilla let out a sound, a low, barely audible grunt, and it sounded so human, so full of suffering, that Lucas couldn't turn away. He stepped forward, cautiously, watching for any sudden movement. The gorilla didn't flinch. It didn't move at all, aside from a slight rise and fall of its chest. Its breathing was shallow, strained. Lucas lowered himself slowly to the ground, sitting just a few feet away. He studied the wound. It wasn't just a cut. It looked like a trap injury, the kind set for smaller animals. A steel snare, maybe. The metal might have cut into the skin, caused an infection. The swelling around it was red, tight, and glistening with pus. He swallowed hard. He had a basic first aid kit in his pack, some gauze, antiseptic, a few gloves, and a bottle of iodine. Nothing designed for a creature this size. Still, it was something. He opened his bag slowly. No sudden moves, no loud sounds. The gorilla watched him. Silently, he put on the gloves, poured iodine onto a cloth, and hesitated. One wrong move, and this could end badly. Even half dead, a gorilla is strong enough to crush a man in a heartbeat. But there was no aggression in the animal's eyes, no warning signs. Lucas leaned forward and pressed the cloth gently to the wound. The gorilla flinched, just slightly, but didn't attack. He let out a breath. The sound wasn't a growl. It was more like a moan, a sound of pain, of surrender. Lucas worked carefully, cleaning the wound as best as he could. The infection was worse than he thought. The smell was terrible, but he kept going. He wrapped the leg in gauze, tight enough to help, not so tight it would cut circulation. Then he sat back, heart still racing. It wasn't a solution. It wasn't even close, but it was something, a start. He reached for his satellite phone. No signal. Of course. He stood and climbed a nearby rise, just enough to try again. Still nothing. He tried sending a signal ping to his camp, hoping it would eventually go through. Then he returned to the gorilla, still breathing, still watching him. The sun was rising higher now. Heat settled over the jungle like a blanket. Insects buzzed louder. Time passed slowly. Lucas gave the gorilla water, dripping small amounts into his mouth from the cap of his bottle. He drank barely, but he drank. Hours passed. He kept talking, not knowing why. His voice was calm, slow. "I don't know what you've been through," he whispered, "but I'm not gonna leave you." Maybe it didn't matter. Maybe the gorilla couldn't understand. But still, Lucas spoke. He shared water, dabbed the wound, sat nearby, waited. Eventually, the gorilla's breathing deepened, just slightly. His eyes closed. Lucas dared not move. He knew he needed help, real help, but leaving now, while the gorilla was vulnerable, felt wrong. What if a predator came? What if he rolled and tore the wound worse? Lucas waited for nightfall. He made a small fire at a distance, not close enough to scare, but close enough to keep some insects and animals away. He didn't sleep. Every few minutes, he checked the gorilla's breathing. Each rise and fall gave him hope. Every time the chest paused just a little too long, his heart stopped too. And every time it resumed, he whispered, "Stay with me, big guy." He'd never felt this before. Not like this. He'd cared for animals his whole life. Raised injured birds, cared for abandoned cats, rescued turtles from roads. But this was something primal, something sacred, a silent agreement between species. He was no longer just a scientist observing from afar. He was a guardian, a protector. He wasn't going anywhere. The night in the rainforest was brutal. Lucas sat near the gorilla, who now lay curled slightly, one arm loosely across his chest. The wound had stopped bleeding, but Lucas wasn't sure if that was a good thing or just a bad sign of deeper infection. He kept his distance, just enough to stay alert and safe, but close enough to monitor breathing. Every rustle in the dark made him tense. He had never felt so small, not just in size, but in power, in control. Everything around him, nature, time, life, and death, felt bigger than him now. And yet, in this moment, he was the only lifeline for a dying silverback. Around 3 a.m., the gorilla stirred. Not much, just a slight shift in the way he breathed, a low huff from his nose, and the tiniest inching of his massive hand. It twitched just once, in the dirt beside him, fingers curling like they were reaching for something that wasn't there. Lucas leaned in, whispering again without even thinking. "I'm still here," he said gently. "You're not alone." He didn't know if the gorilla could hear him. He didn't know what was going on in the animal's mind. But in that moment, he felt more connected to this silent giant than to any person he'd ever known. The sky began to shift around 5 a.m. A slow fade from pitch black to a dull gray blue. Morning fog started creeping through the trees. Birds hadn't started singing yet, but the forest was definitely beginning to wake. And with it came something else. Movement. Lucas heard footsteps in the distance. Slow, deliberate. Not an animal. Boots. He scrambled to the ridge and waved his arms. "Here," he shouted. "Down here." Two figures appeared through the mist. Local forest rangers, Emmanuel and Timo. Both men were part of the protection detail station 10 miles from base. Lucas had met them once, briefly, during his orientation. They rushed to him, out of breath. "We got your ping," Emmanuel said. "Barely." "What happened?" Lucas could barely speak. His voice cracked. "A gorilla injured bad. He's still alive." They followed him down the slope. When they saw the silverback, even they stopped cold. Emmanuel exhaled sharply. "My God, he's huge." Timo knelt beside him carefully, eyes trained on the wound. "This isn't just a scrape. This looks like a snare wound. From poachers. It's infected." Lucas nodded. "I did what I could, cleaned it, wrapped it, but he needs more than that." They radioed back to camp. A vet was on the way. ETA 2 hours. Until then, they'd wait. Together, they gave the gorilla, now semi-conscious, some electrolyte solution via syringe drip. Lucas watched every tiny reaction. A blink, a grunt, a swallow. "He's fighting," he whispered. "He wants to live." The hours passed slowly. Emmanuel told Lucas the area had been quiet for months. No known poaching activity. That's why the snare trap was so surprising. It was illegal, yes, but in remote areas, desperate people sometimes still set them for bushmeat. The problem? These traps don't discriminate. A chimpanzee, a leopard, even a gorilla could wander into one. By the time the vet arrived, the gorilla was visibly struggling. His breaths were shallow again, his skin clammy, but his eyes, those deep, almost human eyes, still found Lucas whenever he moved. They sedated him gently, wrapped him in tarps and blankets, and used a stretcher rig to transport him. It took 6 men to lift him through the underbrush. Lucas walked beside him the entire way, refusing to ride back in the truck. He wasn't going to let this creature leave his sight. Back at the rescue station, the gorilla was given fluids, painkillers, and broad-spectrum antibiotics. They cleaned the wound properly this time, cutting away infected tissue, applying advanced antiseptic treatments, and suturing the deepest gash. Lucas watched from behind a glass window. His hands were trembling. The vet turned to him afterward. "You may have saved his life. Another 12 hours? He wouldn't have made it." They transferred the gorilla into a specially constructed recovery enclosure. Half jungle, half open shelter, fresh fruit, water, shade. It was designed for gorillas who couldn't be immediately released, but still needed the wild around them. Lucas slept for the first time in nearly 36 hours, curled up on a cot in the observation room. The next day, something incredible happened. Lucas returned to the enclosure, moving slowly, not wanting to cause distress. The gorilla was lying down, eyes open, calmer now. And when he saw Lucas, he didn't flinch, didn't growl, didn't retreat. He looked at him, really looked, and let out a soft grunt. The same sound from the forest, the sound that made Lucas stay. That day, they gave him a name, Baraka, Swahili for blessing, and for the first time, Lucas understood how meaningful names could be. Over the next week, Lucas returned every day. He wasn't a vet, he didn't administer meds, but he brought food, sat outside the enclosure, talked in low tones. Baraka grew stronger. The infection receded. The swelling went down. His coat began to look darker, healthier, and with each passing day, Baraka responded more to Lucas. He'd lift his head when Lucas entered, walk slowly toward the fence, sit across from him. One afternoon, Lucas held out a banana through the mesh. Baraka didn't take it at first, just stared. Then, after a long pause, he reached out his massive hand, curled his fingers around the fruit, and didn't just snatch it. He took it, gently, like a friend would accept a gift. Lucas swallowed hard, overcome with emotion. This wasn't just recovery, this was trust. On the 12th day, something strange happened. Baraka didn't sit across from Lucas. He paced, growling softly. Lucas stepped back, concerned. The vet approached, looked him over. "It's not aggression," she said. "It's agitation. He doesn't like the cage anymore." That's a good sign. Baraka had healed enough that he wanted freedom again, but he wasn't ready, not fully. So they made a decision. Expand his enclosure temporarily, give him more room, more branches, a place to climb. The next morning, Lucas watched him explore it like a child seeing a playground for the first time. He climbed, swung, rolled in the grass, and then he beat his chest. Not aggressively, not violently, just once, a single beat, then turned to Lucas and stared, almost like saying, "I'm still here because of you." Word of Baraka's survival began spreading. Conservation groups wrote about it. Wildlife blogs picked it up. They wrote headlines like, "Wounded gorilla rescued by botanist in remote Congo," and "Man stumbles upon dying gorilla. What happens next is incredible." But to Lucas, none of that mattered. What mattered was Baraka's eyes, his breath, the way he reached out that first night, the way he let Lucas touch him, the way he chose not to fear. And maybe that's the part no one could really understand. It wasn't about saving a gorilla. It was about witnessing a soul. Lucas stayed another month. He kept visiting daily, sat through storms beside Baraka's enclosure, sketched plants in a notebook, while Baraka watched curiously from his shaded corner. They became something beyond man and animal. They became two beings who had met at their lowest and had risen together. Baraka was stronger now. He moved with more purpose, more weight in his steps. He would sit tall under the shade of the big tree inside his enclosure, swatting flies away from his shoulder and watching everything that passed. Birds, clouds, people. But more than anyone else, he watched Lucas. It had been 6 weeks since that first night in the forest. The night when Lucas thought he was cradling a dying beast. The night when every breath from Baraka felt like it could be his last. Now Baraka was alive, breathing, moving, and almost ready for the wild again. The rescue team, vets, and local rangers all agreed. The moment was approaching, but they were cautious. Gorillas aren't just released at random. Their territory needs to be safe. Their health needs to be perfect. And perhaps most importantly, they need to be willing to go. Some rescued animals become too comfortable in captivity, losing their natural instincts. Baraka, however, was different. He hadn't forgotten the jungle. He hadn't forgotten what it meant to be wild. But Lucas, he wasn't ready. Not because of selfishness, not because he wanted to keep Baraka for himself, but because something inside him still felt uncertain. Something about the look in Baraka's eyes told him the story wasn't done yet. One morning, Lucas arrived early. The air was still cool, the forest around the sanctuary wrapped in fog. He leaned against the enclosure railing, holding a papaya in his hand. Baraka came slowly toward him, but didn't take the fruit. Instead, he sat a few feet away and stared at Lucas, calmly, directly. Lucas laughed softly. "You don't want this anymore, huh?" Baraka blinked. Lucas let the silence stretch. Then he whispered, more to himself than anyone, "I don't think I can let go either." That same week, everything changed. A group of conservation officers returned from a field check. They had found signs of snare traps, fresh ones, deep in the northeast range. This was bad news. That area was the team's first choice for Baraka's re-release. It had everything: food, shade, clean water, and a known wild gorilla group that Baraka could integrate into. But poachers had found it too. This posed a huge risk. If Baraka was released there and got caught again, there might not be another miracle. A meeting was called. Options were laid out. New potential release zones discussed. Most were farther, less familiar, harder to monitor. Lucas listened silently, his fingers curled into fists. Afterward, he sat alone on a bench just outside the building. He stared out toward the treetops and listened to the sound of distant howler monkeys. Then the door opened. Dr. Emmanuel, the lead vet, joined him. "You've been quiet," he said. Lucas shrugged. "I just want what's best for him." Emmanuel smiled faintly. "You say that, but I think you mean it more than anyone." Lucas looked over. What if the best thing isn't what he wants? What if the wild hurts him again? The doctor nodded slowly. "Then we trust him. Baraka's not helpless. He survived long before we ever knew his name." Lucas didn't answer right away. Then he asked the question that had been burning inside him. "Can I go with him? Just for the first few days?" The answer wasn't simple. It took days of planning, approvals, safety briefings. But finally, the team agreed. Lucas would accompany the transport team during Baraka's release. He'd help guide the route, monitor the gorilla's behavior, and stay nearby in a treetop platform for 72 hours post-release. No interference, no interaction, just watched and hope. The morning of the release arrived. Baraka was loaded into a reinforced wildlife crate, wide, airy, with natural branches laid inside to reduce stress. Lucas stood just beside it, his fingers brushing the edge of the crate, as Baraka sat still inside, not panicked, but watchful. Their eyes met. Baraka leaned forward, just slightly, and let out that familiar low rumble. Lucas felt something in his chest break, not from sadness, but from the weight of what this moment meant. They traveled slowly, avoiding noise, avoiding roads. By dusk, they had reached the clearing. This was the new site, deeper in the forest. A rich, thick area untouched by traps, freshwater streams, fruiting trees, and no human structures for over 40 miles. The team set up the release cage, just inside a grove of fig trees. Baraka could hear the forest, smell it, feel it. Lucas sat quietly nearby, hidden from view, heart pounding. Then the moment came. The door slid open with a creak. Baraka didn't move at first. He just sat inside, eyes fixed forward, and then slowly he rose. He stepped out into the open, one foot, then another. He sniffed the air, looked up at the canopy, and then, without a sound, he walked forward. No hesitation, no fear, like he had always belonged there. For the next 3 days, Lucas watched from a tree platform 50 yards away. He saw Baraka climb, forage, rest. The silverback stayed close at first, within the small valley where they'd released him. But each day, he went farther. Lucas kept notes, radioed back reports. No signs of distress, appetite normal, movement confident, but he said nothing about the part that haunted him. Baraka kept looking back. At dusk, before climbing into the trees to sleep, Baraka would stand at the edge of the clearing and look toward Lucas's direction. Not exactly at the platform, but in that general area. And Lucas wondered, did he know I'm here? On the third night, something went wrong. At around 2 a.m., Lucas was awoken by a distant noise, cracking branches, a rustle, then a sharp cry. Not Baraka, something else. Lucas grabbed his binoculars and scanned the clearing. Nothing. Then he saw movement. 2 figures. Humans. Poachers. He radioed the base. 2 men. South perimeter. Approaching Baraka's area. The response was immediate. Stay put. Do not engage. Rangers en route. But Lucas couldn't sit still. He saw them, crouching low, setting up a trap line. They hadn't spotted Baraka yet, but it was close. Too close. Lucas grabbed his flashlight, pointed it into the trees, and flashed a strobe signal. 3 long bursts. The emergency wildlife alert. He hoped it would scare the poachers. It did. They fled into the forest, but not before leaving behind 2 snares. Lucas climbed down and approached carefully, shaking, heart racing. He found the traps, disarmed them. Then he heard it, a growl, behind him. He turned slowly, and there, just a few feet away, stood Baraka, eyes glowing in the moonlight. Not aggressive, not wild, just present. He had come back. Lucas raised his hand slowly. Hey, he whispered. It's okay. You're okay. Baraka didn't move. Then, shockingly, he walked forward, and for the second time in their lives, Baraka reached out his hand. This time not in pain, not in weakness, but in connection. His fingers brushed Lucas's arm, and for a single, timeless moment, it was just them. No rangers, no cages, no walls. Just 2 beings who had once met on the edge of death, and now stood face to face in life. The next morning, the rangers arrived. The poachers were gone, the traps removed. Baraka was safe. Lucas left the forest that afternoon, but before he did, he climbed to the treetop platform one last time. Baraka stood below, and as Lucas turned to leave, Baraka did something that would become legend among the sanctuary staff for years. He beat his chest, once, twice, then turned and vanished into the forest. Lucas didn't say goodbye. There were no last words, no dramatic gestures, just a slow turn, a quiet nod, and the soft crunch of boots as he walked away from the treetop platform where he'd spent the last few days watching Baraka become wild again. And Baraka, he didn't chase him. He didn't growl or whimper or try to follow. He simply stood under the tall canopy of the rainforest, staring up at Lucas one last time. Their eyes locked, and that was enough, because some connections don't need language. Some relationships are born from silence, from presence, from pain and healing that runs deeper than anything that could ever be said aloud. As Lucas made the long journey back to camp, everything felt different. The trees looked taller, the air felt heavier. Every step away from Baraka was like walking away from a chapter of himself he didn't know existed until now. He didn't cry, not because he wasn't sad, but because sadness wasn't the right word. What he felt was something deeper, reverence. Back at camp, the rangers greeted him with handshakes and smiles. The vet gave him a tight hug. You did good, she said. Lucas nodded, though the words caught in his throat. The research team asked for statements, documentation, video logs. There were emails from conservation groups, even a quiet message from National Geographic. But Lucas stayed mostly silent. What had happened out there, between him and Baraka, wasn't something to be packaged neatly for the media. This wasn't a viral moment. It was a miracle. 2 weeks later, Lucas returned home to Oregon. It felt surreal being back among pavement and people. The sounds of horns and phones and coffee machines filled the silence that the rainforest had once held so tenderly. His apartment looked exactly the same, but he didn't. He moved slower, listened more, slept less. He kept a framed photograph of Baraka on his desk, not a posed shot, just a single still frame from the forest, where Baraka stood near a fig tree, his massive back to the camera, his head turned ever so slightly toward the light. Lucas didn't show it to many people. Some things are too sacred to explain. Back in the Congo, Baraka thrived. Rangers continued monitoring the area with drones and hidden cameras. He was spotted regularly, healthy, strong, alert. He was seen interacting with a small group of other gorillas near a low ridge where the fruit trees grew thick. The group accepted him, slowly at first, then fully. The team called them Baraka's band. He became a leader, not through dominance or aggression, but through presence. Other gorillas followed where he walked. They mirrored his eating, slept close to him. Babies played in his shadow. And the scars from the trap, they faded. Not gone, but softened. Proof of survival, not weakness. He was wild again, but never truly alone, because somewhere in that vast forest, he still paused sometimes, just for a moment, and looked toward the distance, as if remembering something, or someone. Lucas returned to the Congo 1 year later. Not for Baraka. He wasn't there to interfere. He knew better than that. He came to continue his orchid research, but also to build something new, a wildlife monitoring station dedicated to cooperative survival, a place where scientists, locals, and rescued animals could safely reconnect with nature without walls. He named the program the Baraka Project. The idea was simple: trust, patience, and presence. Not every story needed to end in rescue. Sometimes, the greatest thing you could do for a living being was simply stay. Stay close, stay quiet, stay long enough for trust to grow roots. Lucas began training local youth in conservation, teaching them how to identify traps, how to catalog wildlife, how to see the jungle not as something to fear, but as something to understand. And in that process, something inside Lucas healed too. He was no longer just a man who had saved a gorilla. He was a man who had been changed by one. One evening, near dusk, Lucas sat under a tree, flipping through field notes, when a young boy from the village came running. "Mr. Lucas, we saw him." Lucas looked up. "Who?" The boy grinned. "Baraka, your friend. He was here, just across the ridge." Lucas felt his heart thud once hard. He stood, careful not to get his hopes up, but when he reached the ridge and raised his binoculars, he froze. There, on the other side of the valley, stood Baraka. He was older now, his coat darker, his chest broader. He looked regal. Around him sat 3 smaller gorillas, 2 young ones and a female. Baraka sat calmly, watching the sunset, and then, as if pulled by something invisible, he turned. For just a breath of a second, he looked directly toward Lucas. No sound, no movement, but then slowly, he lifted his massive hand and beat his chest. Once, twice, then turned back toward the forest. Lucas stood motionless, heart bursting with something he couldn't name. And suddenly, he smiled. Not the kind of smile for cameras, but the kind that came from knowing, without any doubt, that something real had happened, something that would never leave either of them. To this day, no one truly knows what passed between Lucas and Baraka in that jungle clearing. No one can explain how a dying gorilla recognized kindness in a human, or why a quiet biologist couldn't walk away. But what they both taught us, without saying a word, is that even across species, trust can be built, hope can be restored, and sometimes the most powerful bond in the world begins with silence. He didn't save a gorilla, they saved each other. Quote from Lucas's final field journal entry: "If this story touched you, watch the next one. It's even more powerful."